Hello, I'm Shahrzad Ghanei, and today I'm joined by MP Gارنت MP for Sherwood Park for Saskatchewan in Alberta, and also Shadow Minister of International Development and Human Rights. Mr. Jenes, welcome to Epoch Times.
Thank you. It's great to be with you today.
Now, last year, MP Philip Lawrence, he introduced a bill, it was last, I think, in June, and it was a private member's bill about Bill C-281. It's about fighting human rights abusers all around the world. It's not just about Canada. Looks like it includes a lot of countries, or all the countries. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us more about this bill?
Yes, thank you. So Philip Lawrence, Conservative MP from Peterborough, put forward the International Human Rights Act, and I've been working with him on it. I seconded the bill. This is a powerful new tool we want to create that will shift Canadian foreign policy to be more responsive to human rights abuses around the world. And it contains a number of different kinds of provisions, requiring the government to report annually on its work on human rights, provide more information about political prisoners whose release it's working to secure, that when it includes a change to the sanctions law, so that if Parliament recommends someone be sanctioned, the government has to provide a written response to that. It includes provisions around cluster munitions, and then also that would remove the broadcasting licenses from foreign state-controlled authoritarian media in many cases. So dealing with a number of different issues, but focusing on strengthening Canadian positioning on human rights in the world, strengthening the government's accountability to Parliament, and then also on preventing authoritarian, violent messages associated with foreign governments from being broadcast on Canadian airwaves.
And about one of the provisions that it's about reporting and the list of the political prisoners or prisoners of conscience. Yeah. Is it like these prisoners, should it be related somehow to Canada, or is it just?
No, the provision is that the government would report on prisoners of conscience whose release the government of Canada is actively seeking. That wouldn't necessarily be Canadians. It would in many cases be human rights defenders, people, democracy activists, Falun Gong practitioners, for example, who the government is seeking their release. These are the kinds of people who the government could highlight through a list like this. It's up to the government whose release they're working for and what they would highlight on that list, but it's an important tool. When you bring more attention to these cases, it's often helpful for the people that are affected.
Okay, and how about Magnitsky sanctions? Is it like when this bill is going to be passed, then how can Magnitsky sanction be applied to those abusers of human rights?
So the Magnitsky sanctions bill, it was a Conservative private member's bill proposed by Senator Andrewchuk and James Bazan in the House of Commons, was a good bill because it gives the government a tool, a tool that is sanctioning human rights abusers. The problem is the government has been very limited in its use of that tool. And that's why we want to create, through Bill C-281, a parliamentary trigger. That is, if a parliamentary committee nominates someone, recommends someone for sanctions, the government has to provide a response within a certain period of time explaining whether or not they're going to sanction that individual and giving reasons why or why not. So it's a way of not compelling government action, but prodding the government to actually use this tool that's available to them and that hasn't been used very much at all.
Okay, so how can we see difference between just general sanctions like economical sanctions and Magnitsky sanctions? I know it's just for individuals, but how effective is that, and how fast we can sanction one individual?
Right. So the trend in sanctioning has been to try to become more and more granular. People who have been following these debates for decades will maybe think of economic sanctions as being very broad and blunt in their application. You can't trade with anyone from a particular country, something like that. And the trend has been to say, well, we want to minimize the unintended consequences of sanctions, but we want to target those that are engaging in bad behavior and try to deter that behavior, as well as to address the institutions and weaken the institutions that are actually committing the violence. So Magnitsky sanctions are sanctioning specific individuals who are human rights abusers, saying that they can't move their money or travel to Canada. So it's an individual consequence for individuals. There are other tools we can use for sanctioning entities, governments, your listeners will know about probably our efforts to have the IRGC listed as a terrorist organization. That's a form of holding them accountable as well as an institution. So there's different kinds of tools that exist. The Magnitsky Act is particularly important on the human rights line for highlighting those individual abusers and trying to deter others from committing those abuses in the future. But again, as a tool, it's only as good as its use. It only is only effective if we're using it to actually sanction those human rights abusers.
And have there been any cases that have, like, any individual have been subjected to Magnitsky sanction in the past?
Yeah, the government of Canada has used this tool somewhat, but the use has been very limited and quite selective. Up until recently, there was nobody from Iran, for instance, that had been subject to Magnitsky sanctions. And the government has now tried to use some other sanction tools, but the Magnitsky Act has been quite sparsely used, especially more recently. And there's chunks of people in specific countries, but there are many countries where it hasn't been used at all.
Mm-hmm. And how do you see the timeline for Bill C-281?
The bill has just passed the committee, and it's been through the first hour of debate at report stage. So there'll be a final vote on it coming up on June the 7th. So that's where we're really kind of directing our advocacy efforts towards, is we want to see people support it when it comes to a final vote on June the 7th.
Sorry, you said June 7th?
June 7th.
Okay.
Yes, and
okay,
then it'll
so
go to the
it's close
Senate.
to that.
So it has to go through the Senate as well, and it's up to the Senate whether, how quickly they'll get it done or not. And it's always a bit of a nail biter in a minority parliament because we don't know when the election is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
But our hope certainly is to get this passed into law before the next election, and it'll pass the House. I expect on June the 7th, and then it's up to the Senate how quickly they are able to deal with it.
Okay, and regarding the Iranian community, people are asking how does it really make a difference? How can we feel the difference once this bill has passed?
Yeah, well, a few things. Number one, people in the Iranian community will be able to identify those that are perpetrators of violence and bring their names to parliamentary committees and seek that they be recommended for sanction. So it's a more accessible tool for people who want to see human rights abusers sanctioned. People from the Iranian community will be able to look through the annual report that the government will have to publish and support or critique aspects of that report, maybe identify areas where the report could be improved in a subsequent year, and highlight political prisoners who should be on that list as well. And it will draw, we hope, more attention to some of the prisoners of conscience in Iran that have faced abuse and detention.
Okay, and I know you've been working on human rights. You've been fighting for that for so many years. Can I know that maybe if there is any story behind it about you yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So my grandmother was a Holocaust survivor, and I grew up hearing stories about her life and about other people in a similar situation. And it's always sort of important to me that in 1945, following the end of the Second World War, certain promises were made to her generation. Never again, right? Never again would we allow a genocide like that to occur. And we tried to establish principles of international rule-based order that we would recognize the universal dignity of the human person, and we wouldn't simply tolerate governments that were inflicting horrific violence on their citizens. And it was out of that experience as well that we created the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So this was an important moment for all of us historically, but it was important for me personally because my grandmother was just coming of age, coming out of a really horrible experience in her childhood, but felt hope about whether the world could deliver on these promises. And if you look around us, I mean, we failed, right? It's not a final failure, but we have not lived up to the promises that we made to her generation when events like we're seeing in Iran, in China, and other places are still going on. And so I want to do my part in our time to try to deliver on those promises and create the better world that she and others hoped for.
You also talked about IRGC to be listed on the terrorist as a terrorist organization. Do you think this is something government is currently working, or what do you think about putting IRGC on the sanction list? Because some among Iranian now some people are saying that maybe what the Canada stance on political affairs with Iran might not be as influential, because currently Canada does not have any political relation with Iran, and there is no embassy. What do you think about that?
Well, we're coming up to 5 years since Parliament passed my motion calling on the government to list the IRGC as a terrorist organization. The Liberals have very, frankly, dishonest and insincere on this, because they voted in favor of a motion to list the IRGC as a terrorist organization, and they haven't acted. IRGC needs to be listed as a terrorist organization to hold them accountable for the violence that they're responsible for in Iran, but also in order to protect Canada and Canadians. A critical reason why we shut down the embassy here when Conservatives were in power was that concern about foreign interference. And it's still going on, even though the embassy is not here. There still are other ways that the Iranian regime is trying to interfere in Canada. And this has been big news lately, as the issue of foreign state-backed interference. China, Russia, Iran, there are various players, and we need to protect Canadians from foreign state-backed intimidation and violence. So we would be very much opposed to reopening the embassy, or to allowing any kind of window in that would make people more vulnerable to that kind of intimidation.
Regarding Bill S223,
yes,
which was about human trafficking, I know you introduced this bill maybe around 15 years ago.
Yeah, it wasn't me, but other people have, and it's been 15 years we've been working on the organ harvesting issue in various forms, and
this was passed, right?
Finally passed in December.
In December last year.
In December, and so we're looking to see the implementation now, encouraging provinces, medical associations, and other bodies to work to increase awareness about the new law, and we hope to see those that are involved in organ harvesting now be successfully prosecuted under it.
Yeah, especially Chinese Communist Party, because they've been doing organ harvesting for so many years, especially targeting Falun Gong practitioners, Uyghur Muslims. Yeah. So when can they expect to see a difference here? And what would be that difference?
Yeah. I hope we're all seeing the difference already, in that the greatest likely effect, hopeful effect, is deterrence. That whereas previously it was not a criminal offense for someone to go abroad and receive an organ taken without consent, now it is. So if somebody is considering getting a transplant, they're looking at going to China to receive an organ taken without consent, that person could be prosecuted when they come back to Canada. So the ideal number of prosecutions would be 0, because the effect would be deterrent. People would just no longer do this, right? But I think there will continue to be some of it, and the question will be, is there effective reporting? Is there enforcement? Are there prosecutions that result from it, and does that lead to further deterrence? So to my knowledge, there hasn't been any prosecution under this yet, but we need to increase awareness about the law so that it has that deterrent effect, and that also, if doctors, other medical practitioners see suspicious circumstances, that they're aware of the law and they're able to bring it to the attention of the appropriate authorities.
Okay. And for Iranian community, we are saying that there is a flow of money from people associated with Islamic Republic to Canada. Do you think Bill C-281 can do anything about that as well?
Well, this bill doesn't tackle money laundering directly. There are other proposals we've put forward. It is a big concern, and Adam Chambers, another Conservative MP, put forward a bill to try to combat money laundering. Unfortunately, it was voted down. Liberals and the NDP opposed it, and I can't fathom why. We don't yet have a consensus among the parties in Parliament about the need to tackle this issue, but it's a huge issue, and it's a big part of foreign interference, right? That money comes in and it's being used here then as part of these influence operations, and it's also just stolen money, stolen from people in other countries, the Iranian people in this case, that's being laundered and taken to Canada. So I think a big issue needs to be responded to, and I was very disappointed that our Conservative private members bill was opposed by other parties.
Chinese Communist Party having police stations in Canada, this is being discovered, and also not Canada, we've seen it in US, Europe. So do you think also Iran, Islamic Republic might have the same thing in Canada, because it's intimidating the people who have ties with Islamic Republic are intimidating people, citizens here, Iranian Canadians. So do you think Islamic Republic might have similar thing?
Well, we know that the Iranian regime is a major player in foreign state-backed interference. The precise mechanisms or the structures through which they do it, it may vary from place to place, and I haven't heard evidence about whether they're using the same kinds of structures as has been described. But the fact is they're operating. We know they're operating here, and this is part of why we've called for the listing of the IRGC as a terrorist organization to make it all the easier to shut down those kinds of operations here in Canada.
So any other thing you want to, any message to Iranian people here?
Well, I'll just say I've always been so inspired by the courage of those that are standing up against authoritarian regimes, people in Iran, people in China. It's inspiring to us here in Canada, I think, to see that courage that's displayed, and the courage of people here speaking out against injustice, even when they know that there may be efforts to threaten or intimidate them for that activity, even here in Canada. So I've been inspired by these communities that have stood for justice, and look forward to continuing to work with and support them. Bill C-281 will be a positive step, and there'll be, I think, other steps that we need to take to come.
Okay, thank you, MP Gardner.
Thank you very much.